Hello everyone. It's been a hot second since I've been on here, but it's because I managed to come back home to Turkey, and that's why the background is different. Not the most ideal background, but we'll live with it. And oh my god, things have happened in the world, especially in the US with George Floyd's death and the protests against police brutality and racism. I want to support that movement as much as I can while educating myself more and more about it, because I was born in the US but I wasn't raised there, so the history lessons that I got did not include the Civil War, the US history, and the history of slavery and oppression and racism against black people. So I live there for the most of the year now, and since I am a citizen, it is my duty to learn about this, about white supremacy, and recognize my privilege. I stand in solidarity with the black community in their efforts to right this centuries-old wrong that has been going on in the US. We need to stand together to fix this humanitarian issue. And in today's video, I want to give you guys a bunch of resources down below in the description, as well as recommend some of the black booktubers that I follow, and mention some books I want to read by black authors / featuring black characters, and a couple of books that were recommended for educating ourselves on racism and white supremacy. In light of the things that happened in the past 2 months, I realized that my TBRs consisted of mostly white authors, and I want to diversify that. I want to focus on who I read as much as what I read, because since I'm into more fantasy and the genre is dominated mostly by white authors, I kind of neglected that side of reading and how to expose myself to a more diverse set of cultures and authors. So in this video, I want to go through 5 categories on education on racism, books by black authors or books that feature black main characters, and then Asian authors and characters, Middle Eastern, and Latin American as well. I want to make this stick, and I want to make more conscious decisions about what I read in the future. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Everything started with Books with Shay. I'm gonna have her YouTube link down below, and she did a blackout buddy reads on 2 books that are on racism, and I wanted to read both of those books, but I couldn't even get through the first one in time because I've been in the process of moving, but I'm reading it, I'm getting through it, and I will read the second one. I am reading White Rage by Carol Anderson, and this gives me a very good baseline, I feel, about the black oppression history in the US after Civil War. It includes a lot of topics, how black people were discriminated against, and racism was covered as segregation and an essential tool to build the great America. White authorities strived so hard to keep black people from having adequate education, voting rights, living where they want to live, and moving to another city to find better wage labor. I'm reading through it, and it was like yesterday that these things happened, and it's still happening. Racism is very much alive. Police brutality is very much alive. Racism in authorities high in the government keep people from being rightful citizens in the country, and I recommend this book a lot because it's a heavy read, but it is a necessary read, I feel. The second book in the buddy reads was White Fragility, and I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I know that this is more of highlighting the white supremacy and our privilege in daily life. A lot of people said while reading it they felt very uncomfortable, and that's how it's supposed to make you feel. And I want to read it to recognize my privilege in daily life and learn what I can do to be an anti-racist and not just non-racist, because inaction is not an option. No, it's not. Last book on the topic of education on racism is Me and White Supremacy. This is along the lines of White Fragility, but this is more interactive. I heard about this on BookTube, that it has essay prompts to make you reflect on how you are privileged or how you feel discussing racial issues, and I think it's a very good book to think on the subject and grow. I'm excited to get my hands on it. Next up, I want to talk about a bunch of books by Black authors and or that have Black characters in them. I'm very excited for this because these sound awesome. The first book I really want to get to is Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and this is just fascinating. It's a story about what if the Underground Railroad was a physical railroad, and we follow a Black woman trying to escape the South into the North to save her life, essentially. And I really want to hear this story out. This is a award-winning book, so even though I haven't read it yet, I highly suggest you check it out because it sounds fascinating. Next up, I have a YA contemporary novel, I would say, and it is Girls Like Us by Randy Pink, and this sounds like such a heart-wrenching story. This follows a couple of young women in the 70s and how they struggle to have rights over what happens to their bodies. I heard that this is a very graphic book and that it includes some very overt, sexual abuse and rape scenes. So if that bothers you, don't go into it, but I know this is going to be an uncomfortable read, but I want to read it. The next book on my list is How Dare the Sun Rise, and this is a story about a refugee from Congo. She escapes a massacre in her homeland Congo and escapes into the US, and this book explores the ugly truths behind how refugees are treated and the difficulties they face coming to the US, because escaping the situation back home doesn't solve everything. So I'm really intrigued and want to read this story too. Next up, I have two books by Octavia E. Butler. I'm so excited for these because some of my favorite YouTubers talked about these a lot. The first one is Kindred, and this story takes place around pre-Civil War era, and a woman ends up saving a Black boy from dying, and it follows her and him and the situations they need to go through after this happens. So this story sounds so bomb, and I'm so excited to get into it. And Octavia Butler is so praised, and I want to read more of her works. The next book I want to read by her is Parable of the Sower, and this is a dystopian sci-fi that also explores topics of racism, and this was recommended by Daniel Green, and I love his reading taste anyways, so I trust him, and I feel like this story is gonna be so solid, and Butler is gonna become one of my favorite authors at the end. Next up, we have A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. Oh my god, I'm so excited for this. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. Say no more. The main character is a fierce Black lady. I'm so excited, so pumped for this one. I will definitely let you know what I think of it when I read it. Next up, Pride. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. Again, me and my retellings. I love these books, and I love the homage to the original stories, but also adding in the Black culture that will enrich the story infinitely, and I'm so excited. The last book on my list is Children of Blood and Bone, and this is a fantasy book, the first book in the Legacy of Orisha series, and I'm so excited for this. It's a Nigerian fantasy. I want to learn more about Nigerian culture and how it relates to magic. Fantasy is my favorite genre, so nothing but excitement here. Moving on to Asian authors / Asian themes in books. I have a smaller list for Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin American books in this video, but I want to dedicate longer videos in the future to them, especially if I'm reviewing them. The first book I want to read is Wicked Fox, which is not a fantasy, I feel, but it is a Korean folklore inspired story, and there is romance in it, and I didn't want to know much more because Korean folklore, what an interesting thing to discover. Next up, we have Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa, and this is openly a fantasy book that features dragons, and there's this dragon that can grant wishes. In the past, this wish was used to do something terrible to the kingdom, and we follow our main character as they discover and try to reverse maybe this curse. I'm not sure. I did not want to spoil the plot, so I didn't read too much into it, but I know there are dragons and I'm so excited for it. The last, well, not book, but author I want to recommend under the Asian category is Kazuo Ishiguro, and I just love his work. I cannot tell you how much I adore his writing. I read one book by him called Never Let Me Go, and I was fascinated by the story. There's this posh English boarding school that these kids go to from a very young age. They are taught the fine arts and they have a great education, but they're not allowed to leave the premises, and as they reach a certain age, they are sent out, and our main character discovers the true nature of this boarding school and what role it plays in society and how effed up the society gets. It was so unhinging to read this story because it seems like something that can happen, that can actually happen. Not even science fiction. This is like a dystopian almost. I say just give it a read, and if you like it, let's read more Ishiguro. Okay, Middle Eastern authors. This, I would have a long list of Turkish authors, but I want to do a separate video on translated Turkish books by authors that I really, really love. But for that, I want to read the English translations because language plays a big role in these books, and if the translation isn't as good, I wouldn't recommend them to you guys, but stay tuned for that video. I'm really excited for that one. The first author I want to recommend is Khaled Hosseini. I am so frustrated that I don't hear him being talked about on BookTube because his stories are unbelievably striking. I cried while I read both of his books, The Kite Runner and 1,000 Splendid Suns. They offer a very unique look into the tragedies that people go through, like regular people go through in the Middle Eastern region, and the stories are beautiful, also heartbreaking, and I really want to read his other book, And the Mountains Echoed, really soon because he is one of my favorite authors, period. Just go check out his works. You won't be disappointed, I promise. Another book I came across online is Mornings in Jenin by Susan Abulhawa, and this explores a story within the Israel and Palestine conflict, which is not something I read fiction on, and I'm really excited to see the story unfold, and I'm going to share my thoughts about it later. The last book I have on this category is Map of Sultan Stars, and this premise looks so promising that I think I'm gonna try to read this month. A Syrian family living in New York decide to move back to Syria, but political things are unfolding in the country, and the country is not the same that the mother remembered it to be. And this book follows this family through everything they go through when they move back. And also there's another story explored that takes place in Syria but 800 years ago, and that part includes stories in North Africa as well. We get a glimpse of both Middle Eastern and North African cultures within one story, which excites me so much. Okay, the last category we have for today's video is Latin American authors. And first one, let me shout it out, Paulo Coelho. If you haven't seen me rave about Veronica Decides to Die, I'll link the video right there or down below, probably down below. But his prose and his stories just sweep me away. I'm floored. I read Veronica Decides to Die, Hippie, and The Alchemist by Coelho, and all of them amazed me so much, but I want to reread The Alchemist because it's been a while and I kind of forgot the story. I know that I was fascinated by it, but we're gonna revisit it. And two other books I really want to get to are Brida and The Witch of Portobello, because they are also very praised, and some say The Witch of Portobello is better than the ones I've read, so I'm so excited. He's an amazing author. The next author recommendation under this category is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read Red Monday by him, and I want to read a lot more, especially 100 Years of Solitude, because he's a cult author now, and his writing style is very interesting. The stories involve a lot of names, very long names, because Latin families just accumulate names. I think it's very fitting that he reflects that part of the culture. I found it very fascinating, at least. His stories are brutally honest, and when you read the story and think, oh no, he wouldn't go there, he goes there and just shocks you. I really enjoyed my read. Red Monday was a very thin book, but I want to read more by him, and I suggest checking him out. The last author I have under this list is Isabella Lund, and I haven't read any of her works yet, but I really want to read Of Love and Shadows, which is a romance slash mystery slash fiction novel, and it follows Irene, a magazine journalist that gets assigned on this case with Francisco, and Francisco falls in love with her, but they also uncover some stuff, and I really like stories that follow journalists trying to uncover something. It just gives me a different type of thrill than to follow like official police officers do that same thing. So I'm excited. I will let you guys know what I think. That was it for my diversified TBR for the rest of the year. I probably won't get to all of these books slash authors this year alone because, well, 2020 has thrown a lot of unpredicted stuff our way, so I don't know what's gonna happen in the second half of the year, but I hope to get to as much of these books as possible. Do let me know if you read any works of the authors I mentioned slash the books I mentioned, and feel free to leave other recommendations under any category, because I'm determined to pick my yearly broad TBR list using categories like this so that I can diversify the author pool that I read from, as well as the stories, the cultures that the stories I read represent. Thank you so much for watching the video, and give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!